All right, let's dive into one of the most fascinating and frankly unsettling ideas in the entire Talmud. We're talking about a logical shortcut that seems to fly in the face of one of the most basic rules of reading a sacred text, the idea that every single word is there for a reason. So, picture this. For centuries, you have scholars analyzing every single letter of a text, convinced that each one was put there with divine precision. But then, what if someone comes along and suggests that, some of those words don't actually mean anything specific, that they're just filler, kind of thrown in out of habit? It's a really radical idea, and that's exactly what we're digging into today. Before we get tangled up in ancient Aramaic, let's think about how we talk right now. If you say you bought something lock, stock, and barrel, you're not actually talking about the specific parts of a gun, right? You're just using a common phrase to mean you bought the whole shebang. The words are just part of a package deal. Just hang on to that idea because it's the perfect way to understand this ancient concept. Okay, so let's get into our first section and put an official name to this really unsettling idea. We're going to define the concept and get into exactly why it was so controversial for the Talmudic sages. The term is kedi nasva, and while it literally means something like it was taken in order to, the translation that really captures the spirit of it is much cooler. It went along for the ride. The argument is that sometimes an author included a word or even a whole law, not because it was the main point, but just because it was part of a common list they were rattling off. It's basically a passenger, not the driver of the sentence. In this quote right here, it gets right to the heart of the issue. The entire rabbinic tradition is built on this foundation of carefully analyzing every single word. So for someone, in this case the Talmudic narrator, to just dismiss parts of an ancient teaching as non-deliberate, well, that is, as the source puts it, rather bold. It's kind of like a literary critic saying Shakespeare just threw in a few lines because they sounded good with no deeper meaning. But here's the thing. This wasn't just some wild theory somebody cooked up. The Talmudic narrator actually used this shortcut to solve real, tricky problems in the text. So now, let's take a look at the evidence. So check out this case from the tractate Zevachim. A teaching lays out 3 laws that it says are derived from the term sin offering. Now, the first law, that's the main point. But the Talmudic narrator hits the brakes on the other 2, basically saying, whoa, hold on a second. The proofs for those 2 laws are found somewhere else entirely. So, what's the solution? You guessed it. Kedi nasva. The second and third laws are just passengers. They weren't supposed to be derived from here. They just got included because these 3 laws often travel as a set in these kinds of discussions. 2 out of 3 were just along for the ride. And get this. This wasn't a one-time thing. The Talmudic narrator, who's basically the final editor of the Talmud, pulls out this exact principle 6 separate times to fix contradictions. That tells you it wasn't some last-ditch effort. No, it was a deliberate, go-to tool in their interpretive toolkit. And this tool was like a Swiss Army knife. It got used in Soda to deal with the laws of an unfaithful wife, in Bava Metzia for rules about lost property, and in all these other super complex legal areas. It even gets brought up as a possible solution in a discussion about betrothal, though they end up rejecting it there. The point is, this principle could be applied almost anywhere a text seemed to be contradicting itself. Okay, so this brings us to a huge question. If the Talmudic narrator is using this powerful tool, where did it come from? Who was the first person who dared to suggest that some parts of the sacred text were just filler? One of the key things to get about the Talmudic narrator is that, yeah, they're bold, but they're also pretty humble. They don't really invent brand new ideas out of thin air. Instead, they build on and organize the ideas of the named sages who came before them. So the source of this idea has to be hiding in the words of an earlier rabbi. And here he is. The source of this whole radical idea was Rav Chisda, a major sage from 3rd generation Babylon. He was the one who first came up with kedi nasva as a clever way to solve a really tough textual problem, way before the Talmud's final editors ever got their hands on it. But Rav Chisda's idea wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms. In fact, it sparked this amazing intellectual rivalry with another major sage of his time. It's a classic Talmudic showdown that shows us 2 completely different ways of thinking. So here is the puzzle that started it all. A teaching lists a bunch of sacrifices that you are not allowed to delay offering past the 3 major festivals. And on that list is the Pesach, the Passover offering. But wait a minute, there's a huge problem. The Passover sacrifice can only be brought on Passover. You can't offer it at other festivals anyway, so a rule telling you not to postpone it makes absolutely no sense. It's a flat-out contradiction. And the 2 ways of solving this problem couldn't be more different. On the left, you have Rav Chisda, the pragmatist. He has a simple, clean solution. Pesach is just part of a standard list. The author was just rattling off familiar groups and included it without thinking too hard. It just came along for the ride. But his rival, Rav Chisda, the purist on the right, he can't accept that. He insists every single word has to have a purpose. So he invents this unbelievably complex, far-fetched scenario to make the text work perfectly. It's a true battle between simple, practical thinking and complicated textual perfectionism. And this wasn't just a one-time thing. This exact same argument between Rav Chisda and Rav Chisda pops up again in a totally different part of the Talmud. This shows us that this wasn't about solving one little problem. It was a deep, fundamental clash between two totally different ways of reading a text. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? In our last section, let's zoom out a bit and see what this ancient rabbinic shortcut can really teach us about how we read and interpret things today. This timeline really tells the whole story perfectly. It all starts with an early sage, a Tana, who writes a text that's just a little bit messy. Then, Rav Chisda comes in with his pragmatic, along-for-the-ride solution. His rival, Rav Chisda, challenges him, demanding a perfect, literal reading. And then, centuries later, the Talmudic narrator takes this old, disputed idea from Rav Chisda, dusts it off, and turns it into a standard tool to solve totally new problems. When you boil it all down, what kedi nasva really shows us is a core tension that exists in any kind of legal or textual interpretation, whether we're talking about ancient Babylon or modern courtrooms. It's a conflict that is absolutely still alive and well today. And here are the two sides of that conflict. On one side, you have textual perfectionism, this belief that every single word is deliberate, perfect, and packed with meaning. And on the other side, you have practical problem solving, the idea that, hey, sometimes language is just messy and imprecise, and you need a tool like kedi nasva to make the text work and fix its own contradictions. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you're reading anything, a legal contract, a news article, whatever it is, think about this debate. How do you decide what's absolutely essential? What's the core message? And what might just be a turn of phrase, a bit of habit, a word that simply came along for the ride? Because as Rav Chisda and Rav Chisda show us, that's a debate that's far from over.